and welcome back to The Hobby Musician. Now you're joining us as we are right in the middle of several building projects here on the channel, and as it turns out, on each different build, I'm actually at the same point. So I wanted to make a video today about the specific project I'm working on for both builds. Now, if you want to kind of dive into either project, go ahead and start clicking the links at the top. The first one I'll put up is a playlist to the very customized, like single cut bass guitar that we're making. And then the second playlist is to our really out there hybrid build where we're building a partially fretted, partially fretless electric guitar. And in either case, I'm at the point where I need to work on the headstocks of the necks. You might say we're neck deep into these projects. So yes, that terrible pun does serve as a segue. We are talking about headstocks. Now, if you're a longtime viewer of the channel, you will know that in previous building projects, when I was first learning what I was doing and just getting my feet wet in the process, I built necks and I left headstocks perfectly straight. Now, one of the reasons I did that, I was nervous. I knew that leaving a headstock in line with the rest of the neck is the easier thing to do. You don't have to worry about cuts. You don't have to detach a headstock, reattach it, angle things. It was just the easier thing. But now we're older, we're wiser, and I wanted to experiment with angling my headstocks. Now, if you do your homework, you'll know and you'll discover pretty quickly there are two primary ways you can do this. The first one is if you start with a neck blank that is much, much bigger than the profile of what you need in the end, what you can do with that blank is you can actually draw out, turn it on its side, you can draw out the long straight portion of the majority of the neck, and then at the end you can take a protractor and draw out the exact angle that you want that headstock to come down, and if the blank is big enough, all of it fits on that one piece of wood. You then take it to your bandsaw and you lay it on its side and you can cut out the long straight neck with the angled headstock. There's two problems with that. One, I don't have a bandsaw. Number two, also longtime viewers of the channel know that we typically do our builds, we like to reclaim wood, scavenge wood, use materials that would otherwise be thrown away. We don't always have the luxury of obtaining large blanks like that. The second method, the method we're going to talk about today, is you can use what we call a scarf joint. You can cut an angle into a thinner piece. You know, if you just make a blank that's as thick as the neck, you can cut that at an angle and reattach it, and then you'll be able to still have the angled headstock. Now, as I said before, I didn't know how to do this initially, so I had to do my research, and there are a lot of videos online, but one of the great ones here on YouTube is from Paul Mero over at Junk Pile Guitars. I'm going to put a link to his video down in the description, and he talks about how he built a little simplified jig that he put onto a miter saw, just a typical miter saw that you maybe already have, or lots of hardware stores even have tool rental programs. You could maybe rent one for a day and make some scarf joints of your own. Well, he talks about this jig and what it allows him to do. So I want to show you kind of what I ended up building. I followed his instructions and I took some scrap wood, and all I needed were 3 pieces of wood. And this is the jig that I ended up building. First and foremost, this big bottom thing, the bottom piece, I put this in the miter saw, and right here, if you see, if I hold this straight like this, you can see this side is the angled side and this side is the straight side. Well, I set my miter saw to 13 degrees. I want to make my headstocks at 13-degree angles, and I just set it at 13 degrees, and I cut this big bottom board at 13 degrees. I then took the board out, and you can see here, I just took another straight piece and I screwed it here, and there's glue holding the joint. So now this board, if you put it flat against anything, this board here is angling away at 13 degrees. So now when you reset your miter saw to perfectly straight or the 90 degrees angle, anything you hold against this and cut down with your miter saw now will be cutting on a bias. It'll be cutting at a 13-degree angle. Now this piece right here is just unique to me. I wanted to have a piece that fits around the end of my miter saw. As you can see in this picture, This just happens to be the exact distance. I put this in, clamped it down, and glued this piece in. So now it's very easy to put in and take out of my miter saw whenever I needed to cut these angles. So this jig now allows us to clamp neck boards onto this and come down, just zip right down the angle we need. Now, let's take a minute to talk a little bit more about the scarf joints themselves. As I said before, we're cutting an angle into an otherwise flat piece of wood. So what I've got here is an extra piece of the neck blank we made. Now you can check out some of those previous videos in those playlists and we'll talk about how we made these, but imagine that they start, well, they're just long flat pieces like this. Well, this jig allows me to now I can take this jig and I can set the flat piece into the jig. And as we said before, holding it into the miter saw against this flat board, right down here, when the miter saw comes down, it cuts this angle that I'm squeezing with my fingers. Okay, well now that this cuts at an angle, we have two pieces like this. Well then, the way the joint works is you take one piece, flip it upside down, and now that it's upside down, if you join it back to the first piece, you can see here, for a while, here's the neck, it's continuing straight, and then it takes off and dives down, and you can see we've got an angle, and you can cut out now the shape, and you can route out all the other parts of your neck, and now you've got an angled headstock. Well, there are actually two configurations that you can use with a scarf joint. So now that we have our pieces like this, you could potentially rejoin them with the new piece on the bottom. And if you look here, you still get that same kind of flat piece. I'll try to hold it like this. You still get a flat neck and then it takes off and it just continues with the same angle. Or geometrically, if you take this piece and put it on top, you also get a flat piece and an angle down this way. I just want to let you know I am using this configuration because one of the benefits of doing this is that I know I'm also going to be installing a fingerboard on top. After you cut the channel for your truss rod, you install a fingerboard on top. So I'm going to be using glue and attaching this. So there's glue on the bottom of this extra piece, and there's going to be glue and another piece of wood on top. You're essentially sandwiching in this cut piece into your neck, making it increasingly strong. So there's two kind of factors that are holding this in and providing resistance to the tension that the strings are going to put on there. Now you can see in this picture, I'm sure it does take some glue and some clamps on there. One little tip that I did is before I put those clamps on, I actually just used hand spring clamps and I held it in place, and I drew back on the profile of my neck, and I noticed that I had extra space on the outside, space that was going to get cut off anyway. So in these spaces, I actually drilled 2 pilot holes and put screws in there, and those screws now help keep everything locked sturdy in place so that when the glue and the clamps go on, I don't get any kind of sliding around back, forward, left, or right that you can kind of get when you're gluing 2 flat pieces of wood together. If all I did was clamp it, it could kind of maybe, I don't know, get catty-cornered, slide as I'm letting it dry. I walk away and it starts to slowly slide. If you use kind of set screws, or if you use guide screws like I did, you actually prevent any of that from happening. And then, like I said, you come back and you actually cut away any of that extra wood so you don't even see it in the final neck. Okay, well, once that's all said and done, you can now continue on with the rest of your neck. I went down and actually, the first thing you do is you practice. So I apologize for jumping around, but here is an example of one of the practice necks that I made. After the jig was done, before I used the nice blanks, I went and got scrap wood, and you can see here, if you follow the lines of this plywood, you can see where the angles, where the angle cuts in and where they're joined. And I highly recommend practicing because you're gonna need to get a sense for how long the travel is in the blade. In other words, depending on your angle that you decide, you get more or less of a surface here that gets cut away. So I didn't really know how that was going to affect my actual blanks. So I wanted to take practice scraps of wood to make some of those cuts. And I even went so far as to clamp this one and glue this one so that I had a miniature little neck here from start to finish. The other thing that you're going to want to practice is I would recommend writing labels to yourself. Write the word top, write the word bottom, write left, right, all that kind of stuff onto the surfaces of the wood, pretending that it's your actual neck plank, because it can kind of get a little weird when you're actually doing the cuts to see this. So I want to show you that cut right now. And as the video comes up, I just want to mention this video is actually running in real time. I did not slow this down. The reason I'm mentioning that is I specifically went very, very slow through this cut because I didn't want it to chip or cut out or rip out any chunks of the neck. I wanted smooth cuts. You can also see that using the jig, I had a scrap piece of wood that I was holding up against the bottom to help me keep it. After I clamped it to the jig, I noticed that that back end kind of came away a little bit from it. So that's what the extra scrap of wood is for that on the back. But if you go slow and if you take your time and if you practice, you can actually get really smooth cuts. And I'll be honest, using this jig and going that slow, I did not have to do any additional sanding at all. The surfaces came out incredibly smooth and incredibly matched to one another for the gluing and the reattaching of those headstocks. Okay, well, talking about it is all well and good. What do these things look like at the end of the day? Well, here are the two necks from the two projects we're working on. And of course I've already got the fingerboards on here, but I wanted to show you the profiles of this. So if I hold this neck up straight, you can see we've got our straight neck and then the headstock comes down. And on this one in particular, you can actually notice the coloration in the wood. You can really see that angle cut in here because of the darker piece and the lighter piece. And right there, just on the edge, you can see that joint. And as we said before, yeah, we do have a sandwich. We have the fingerboard on top and we have the piece on the bottom glued both to this headstock piece, jointed in there. And it fits seamlessly into the rest of your build. You can go through, you can carve the radius of the neck, all that kind of stuff, work on your frets and your markers, all that kind of stuff, and it just blends in. Now, one thing to keep in mind is there will be some cosmetic, considerations if you do this. You can see here on the back there is a line. That line is the end of the bottom part, and that's where the top part comes in here. So there will be a visible joint when you make a scarf joint. I mean, that comes with the territory. But in my case, I'm careful with it. I've sanded it down. All these necks are going to get finished and sealed with oil. So all of it is going to be protected. But I just wanted to put that out there to note that if you do this technique, whatever method you decide to do, whether you use, put this extra piece on top like I did, or the other way that you can do it, in either case, you're going to have a visual mark. So you can see the visual indicator on the side of the neck, but you can also see it on the back of the neck. Same thing here with our other build. It's just a little harder to see because the coloration of the wood. Maybe I'll go this side. The coloration of the wood is a little closer in this, but you still see right here is where it starts and it comes down in an angle, but if I turn it over, the same thing happens. You can see that there is a joint right here. But the strength of these, this is doing this method and using a scarf joint, sandwiching it like we're doing here, this is going to create a plenty strong enough joint so that when your tuning pegs go in there and you actually attach the strings, the tension of the strings pulling back on that headstock is not going to run any risk or danger of snapping it or detaching it from your bottom. So, like we said, that is kind of an upgrade from trying to do just straight headstocks, which we did in our very first build. So I hope you got something out of this episode, and as always, I want to thank you for watching, and until next time, play on, my friends, play on.